Hello everyone. Today we're going to discuss about code 10 challenges again, and this is actually for the API testing. So we have discussed last time on manual testing, and this time today API testing questions. There are a few common interview questions that interviewer may ask you during an interview. So let's get started on the API testing questions. So let's say very common interview questions. The first question interviewer may ask you first, number one, let's say interviewer just say that when you start talking about your experience and all these things, the first questions may come like what are the common HTTP methods and HTTP status code. So let's see if I write it. What are the common HTTP methods and status codes? So you know the answer. I'm going to write it, just say that get, post, put, talk about path, delete, and that um, status codes. Let's say that you can talk about 200, 201, 204. You can talk about 400 bad request. You can talk about 401 forbidden. You can sorry, 401 is unauthorized. My bad. 401 is unauthorized. Can talk about 403 forbidden. 403 forbidden. You can talk about 404 very common, right? 404 not found. You can talk about 500 is very common as well, internal server error. So this is very common interview question. Just remember that you can remember all the status codes and all the methods you have sent. Methods you may get it or you may not forget it, but the status code sometimes it might guys mixed up, right? So 201 is created and 204 is no content, and whereas 404 is not found. So some people get mixed up. Number two, following questions. Following question interview may ask you, this what validation do you perform? Right? Talk about what validation do you perform um, in API testing, right? In API testing. So validations you can check. What are the checks you do? Let's say that you can check status code, status code. What else? You can check response body, response body. What else? Headers, response headers, response headers, and you can check error message. Very important. Error message. You can talk about what are the business rules, because you need to check that acceptance criteria, right? Business rules that comes from acceptance criteria. You can talk about schema validation. Very important, schema validation. You can check the schema, and you can talk about response time as well. Response it's too slow, you can just notify them. These are the validation performed during API testing. Okay. So number three, the following question. They can ask you a specific so that since you have talked about get, post, put, patch, right? And talked about some status code. So they would ask you that what are the difference between put versus patch, right? Difference in put versus patch. At the same time, they can ask you that 201 versus, I mean, 204 versus 404. Looks very pretty similar, but they are not. One is 200 series, another one is 400 series. So that these are this very common interview questions. So that how can you answer this question? You can say that put completely completely update. You can say update or replace existing resource. Patch also. Patch update or what can say update. It's not replacing, actually update specific field of an existing resource. So you can talk, you can say like this. Put actually completely update replace existing resource. Whereas patch, what it does actually update a specific field, partially update. So another question is 204. 204 is equal to what? No content. And 404 equal to not found. Two different things. Not found. The following question, we can talk about authentication authorization. So you can say that what are the, or you can say that what is the difference between authentication versus authorization versus authorization. At the same time, they can ask you that, okay, what are the authentication have you used or authorization have you used? And what are the authentications have you used while performing API testing? So, I mean, they can ask one question or two questions at the same time. Okay. So we can talk about authentication. Actually, it actually verifies. It actually verifies who you are, and authorization. It actually indicates, I would say, or determines what are the folders you're gonna get access, or what you can say you are allowed to access access in the system. Okay, so this is actually authentication versus authorization. And what are the authorization have you used? Out, you can say that bearer token. You can talk about API key. API key basically for external APIs. External API. You can talk about JWT as well. JSON Web Token. You can talk about OAuth 2. So these are the authentication have you used, right? Following question. So what could be the following question? They can ask you, let's say that you talked about API testing a lot, right? You talked about status codes, you talked about validation, you talked about some differences, you talked about authentication, but what tool have you used? What are the tools have you used? What are the tools have you used for API testing? Think about it. What are the tools have you used for API testing? I think you are thinking like that. You are correct. You know this, right? Postman, very common API testing tool, right? Postman. So we use actually for manual validation, right? And then what? Swigger. Swigger actually for API documentation. Hmm, we get from where we get the endpoint, endpoints. We understand um, the response structure. Okay, we understand query parameters. Query parameters. We understand from the Swigger document, and you can talk about rest assured for API automation. You can say that API automation. Then TestNG, right? TestNG for what? TestNG for test execution. When you execute the test, you need to do some assertion, right? Uh, Assertion or validation, right? And you can talk about JSON path. Remember JSON path? What? For response parsing, right? Response parsing. Okay. So these are the very common things. You do that. Also, you remember that Maven you used, right? Maven for what? Dependencies. You know that you need to rest assured dependence, right? And test engine dependencies. Dependencies you can talk about build. So you used Maven. Good. The following question. Following question, you may get, let's say that API bug. And they talked about describe the most critical API bug found. Most critical API bug. You can talk about a bug, and at first you need to talk about what was the API. Was the API where you found the bug, and then you talk about that what was the impact, impact on the business, because there was a bug, right? That there should be impact, right? And how did you find it? How did you consider identify it? By getting get request or post request, get or post request. So somehow you got it right, and you can talk about did you reproduce it? Reproduce it, produce it, and then did you root cause analyze RCA? Did you root cause analyze it? And then how did you um, found the root cause of the bug? So you can talk all about this, Hmm? And how did you log the bug? You can talk about the Jira. Jira is also a bug tracking tool as well. Following question. Uh, this this is also a common question. You can think about it. How did you test an let's say the API when there is no UI available, right? So how, or you can say how in general question. So what are the things available to us at that point? There is no UI. So API documentation. So we need to understand. We need to understand API documentation. Where you get what? Let's say that in from Swagger document. Swagger document. Then at first understand, then analyze it. analyze the contract. You know that contract means what I'm gonna send and what I'm gonna get as a response, right? So what should I send and what should I get? That's actually contract, huh? And as the contract, you can talk about some positive, huh? Positive and negative, huh? Scenarios. Then you can then what are the changes in database, huh? Changes in database, huh? Then you can talk about that what changes after that, right? What changes um, after executing, what is after executing the API in downstream, huh? If you have a downstream, if you have access to the downstream, then you can check that downstream. Okay. So the following question, we can think about how do you test or validate um, after sending a post request, huh? How do you validate response, right? Response after sending a post request, huh? Tell me, anybody think about it? Got it, right? What are the things? I check, you check about, let's say you validate um, required fields, huh? Required fields, you validate um, mandatory fields, huh? You validate this um, data type, okay? Then you validate um, duplicate data, duplicate data. Then you try to validate some business rules that comes from so this comes from AC, acceptance criteria. And you can talk about status code, definitely, always status code is the first one, okay? So these are things when you have send it, and also database, so database, the following question, they can ask you like what challenges you have, what challenges have you um, faced while you know working on API in both manual and automation. So what are the challenge? You can say that uh, different way. I mean that can be a challenge. Let's say that handling dynamic tokens. This is one challenge because every time you need a new token. So that's another problem. Um, and there's some APIs actually. Some APIs don't work for all environments. Let's say that some API, couple of APIs works for dev environment, couple of API works for Q environment. So it's not like all environment, all the APIs are working for all environments. That's another problem. There's some dependencies as well. Dependency between APIs. Let's say that one you need to send one API first and then the following API will work. So if you try to send the second API before sending the first API, it's not going to work. So there's a dependency. There's some dependencies are there. So this you can talk about this. The following thing you can talk about, the response values are dynamic, right? You can say dynamic response values. So response values are not similar in all the requests. Let's say that now you send a request, you see the one response value. Now I send a request again, you see the different response value. So response value will not be same. Hmm. And how about that very large response, right? Very large, huh? JSON response. This is another challenge, right? To extracting, parsing, and then validation from a very large, JSON response. This is another problem. And server issues always there, right? Server issues, huh? Always there. Okay. And the next question can talk about last question. So yeah, this is very common interview question, right? What happens if API returns, let's say, the 200 status code, but the data is wrong? Hmm? What happens if API returns HTTP returns 200 status code, but the data is wrong? Hmm? So how do you answer this? Because it is simple, right? Status code does not ensure a correct response. Status code ensures that the you send the request, a request was sent perfectly, and response you got that is also perfectly. It got the transmission was perfect, but what the response transmitted to you, it does not ensure that that response is correct. It only ensure the transmission was correct. Okay. So status code ensures what? Would ensure transmission was correct, but the response I test it based on the business rules, hmm, using the acceptance criteria in the story. Okay. So these are the most common 10 questions. You just need to go over these questions and answers and try to practice, and um, you can talk to your mentor or talk to your friends, and discuss about the questions, and you guys can ask the questions to each other and try to answer those questions and try to correct those questions, so that this way you'll be mastering all those 10 questions. So thank you. Next video we'll talk about some other topics. Thank you so much.